We took those funds and went and bought whatever was doing poorly. You're like, why would I do that? You're literally selling high and buying low. Hey, Nick.
Scott, what is going on? We're back.
We are. Another episode of Real Personal Finance.
Yes, sir.
And today, one of the things that we have just seen in life, right? It's still we're recording this in late January. It's the newer part of the year. And, it's a good time to remind ourselves to focus on things that we can control, because we're seeing a lot of change and turmoil in the world right now.
Sure are. It is always a good reminder to come back to, well, what are things that are inside our control?
Yeah.
What can we draft upon within our financial plan? What's outside of our control? Not saying we're not going to worry about it, right? But what are things that we know tried and true are within our power?
Yeah. So, of course, we'll look at it through this lens of financial planning. And we get to work with a lot of clients and build plans, which is where I would start with, for focusing on what you can control, build your own plan. And if you don't have one.
What's the old adage, right? You don't have a plan,
failing to plan is planning to fail. Dwight Eisenhower. Yeah.
There's that one. And, if you don't have a map, well, any road will take you there. So let's make sure we have a plan.
Yes. Now, of course, and I know you do similar work to me where we're focused on clients and the lives they want to live and really thinking that money is just a tool. Mm-hmm. And that's tool's job is to help you get the life you want as quickly as possible. What are some of the things you think about when you think about things that we can control with our clients?
Yeah, it goes back to the personal element of it, right? We say all the time that, personal finance is much more personal than it is financial, right? Mm-hmm. And so the things inside our control, I can control how many Amazon packages come to my house. Kind of.
I can't. My wife's in charge of that.
I can control, what I'm spending. I can control, and we'll dive into taxes and, how we invest and those types of things.
Yeah.
But just from purely a spending standpoint, if we can't control the job we're in or getting a big raise or those types of things, we could absolutely control what we are spending, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is coming out every month, right? Or what big expenses that we have coming up in the future and how we're going to have a plan for that. Right?
Yeah, no, good point. I mean, when I think about cash flow for clients, I think you're nailing it. It's like we really have four main things that we get to look at with clients. And that's, what are you guys saving of your income? What are you spending of your income? What's going toward debt payments? And what's going toward taxes?
Mm-hmm.
And those four things should add up to almost 100%.
Right.
And the reason I say almost is because taxes are almost always backward looking. They are, because we've paid last year's taxes, right? So we can get a better sense of roughly what do we owe in taxes. Spending is variable. Savings is fairly static. We know what it's going to be. And then our debt payments are usually pretty static. So you can quickly get a sense of where's money going. And these are four things I get to control, right? If Nick wants to retire faster, he can choose to save more and spend a little less, right? If he wants to work longer, he can choose to spend more now and save a little less. Totally choices in our control.
And when I look at that too, one of the things that comes to mind is I like working backwards into my spending and my budget. That's just, that's what works for me. Mm-hmm. But going back into those four categories, once I kind of figure out my savings rate, right? I figure out what's going to debt, figure out, my fixed bills and those types of things. I then love focusing on what is my discretionary money? What can I absolutely spend? And then again, going to your point, if I look at it as levers and toggles. If I want to have an earlier retirement, well, I'll take a little bit more from what would be, fun money, so to speak, today, and I'll put it more towards my savings rate or vice versa. But having that number and having a plan to first kind of dial in, it's going to be so important moving forward, right? So that's what's going to drive everything, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things a lot of people miss this because people will come and be like, when can I retire? Or they'll think even more so, it'll be you'll hear that oh, so-and-so has 10 million bucks. And you're like, man, they're wealthy. And it's like, anytime I hear that, I'm just like, are they?
Right.
Like how much do they spend every year? Because if they spend $1 million a year, they're not wealthy. They only have 10 years of assets or 10% withdrawal rate on $10 million. They're not wealthy. But if instead they spend $200,000 a year, they have 50 years of assets, right? They have more money than they'll need or the next generation will need if they live in a similar lifestyle. So it's like, how much you spend and understanding your spending is so important to understanding how financially free you're going to be, because then you're going to take that with the savings rate and the assets and the asset allocation and the rates of return, and you're going to figure out, when do I get to make work optional?
Right. And, and like the paradigm, or the paradox rather, of just the example that you mentioned, like that person who has the $10 million that has, they're spending $200,000 a year, right? They have 50 years worth of expenses just paid for, which then leads into how we invest our money once we understand how much we're spending. I would argue that person, right? Two people, $10 million each, but the one spending less, I guarantee over time, they're going to be even wealthier, right? Because they could take on more risk in the stock market,
right,
and allow their money to grow and compound and all those great things, because their personal spending rate is so much lower. They're putting more money into the game than the person, right? I actually just had a meeting a couple weeks ago with a client kind of talking about this, of what does it look like to play your own game, right? Doesn't matter what your neighbor or your coworker or your cousin, whoever it is, what they're spending or what their number is, we're staying in our own lane, right? And we will then back into how we invest, how we structure your stocks versus bonds based off of what your first number is, how much we could spend.
Right. Yeah. Which we should be. You want to be planning for yourself, not just the rules that you read online or that are given generically, right? You really
they're
do
a good starting place, but
they
doesn't mean anything to you. It's not personal.
Yeah, it's like setting an equalizer on an old stereo system, right? That shows up with everything's level, and you got to figure out what your preference is for that sound. Yeah, I mean that's looking at cash flow. I think from cash flow, the next thing I think about for what people can control, and when I think about what people can control, normally when people are calling and they're usually anxious about something in life, and whether that's they're worried about their job or they're worried about their family or a health scare or something's happening. God forbid, like the fires that just happened recently in Southern California, or the hurricanes on the East Coast, right? There's always something to be worried about. Having some type of an emergency fund can make a lot of sense for people. And that's just keeping a little bit of cash that's really just in a money market fund, maybe US Treasuries earning 4% a year. It's just there in case you need it. And it's just a matter of figuring out how much do you need and why do you need it?
Right. And again, going back to the personal element of it, each person is going to be different, right?
Yeah.
You'll have someone like a Dave Ramsey saying the true and tested 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses, right? 3 if you're married and there's 2 incomes coming in, or 6 if it's 1 income. And again, for that, another rule of thumb, right? Yes. I like to have a little more padded under the mattress, so to speak, where that emergency fund, it's not if, it's when you're going to need it. And it feels really nice being able to say, like, hey, we saved for that. We didn't know what we would be saving for when that, whatever it was, right, occurred. But we have that covered, right? We talk about, how stressful money can be when we don't have some of those things accounted for. And so that's absolutely, I think, one of the things I love saying too is, like, you actually don't need a specific event to be saving for. You could just save, right? Here at some point you're going to need it, but there doesn't have to be a goal attached to it. It's a good habit to get into regardless.
Absolutely. And I think everyone's number is different, to your point. I think the question ultimately becomes, like, how much needs to be somewhere so that you can sleep well at night, regardless of what's happening in life or in markets, right? Like you just want to know you're okay. And, I think from there, when we think about what people can control, if we go shift to markets, people will often be like, the thing that they want to know what's going to happen in markets any given year, right? So like even like last year, and people are people, just people in general, but also the professionals, and professionals are in quotes because it's the Wall Street guys who tell you what the rate of return is going to be of the S&P 500 for the coming year. And last year they were atrocious, and they're atrocious every year because they're trying to predict the future. They don't know how to do it, right? No one does. But what we can control is we can control the amount of risks that we're willing to accept to get returns in the future. And the reason I say that is if you just accept no risk, all you get is the US Treasury bill, right? You get the short-term Treasury bill that'll give you right now, I think around 4%. And that's it. That's what you get because you're not willing to take risk. Risk is what gives you the return. If you did put that risk into the markets, in the US markets last year, you got over 20% returns.
Yeah.
Really nice. Developed markets were different. But what we can do is we can control how much we're going to put in the stock market, how much we're going to put in the bond market, how much we're going to put into real estate. Look at all of those things and see like what's the right allocation for me. And my thought is it would always be derived by, to the point you made earlier, Nick, the goals that you have as an individual. What do you want to be building for? What are we aiming for? That's what we should be using.
Absolutely. I mean, it comes back to like, what are we planning for, right? To your point, what are we aiming for? And it all ties back, right, to cash flow, right? We got to get that squared away first and foremost. Then once we have a goal, we got our cash flow shored up, then the fun begins, really. I think that's, I would say probably for both of us, once we have those answers, then it's like, okay, great. What can we start dialing in different accounts for? How much risk do we want to take on? What is our goal? What direction are we going? Right. Because to your point, yeah, last year was a phenomenal year in the market. Right. And so, but we have to have that cash flow first shored up to be a participant in that. Right. And so, a conversation we have all the time, right, is markets did this last year, well over 20%. Well, my portfolio did this. Well, let's go back to what was the goal of this portfolio? Well, was it because you're buying a house in the next couple of years? Well, guess what? Your return isn't going to match what the market's going to match. Right. Or are we saving for retirement and we still have 20 plus years? Well, time's on our side, being a huge resource, and we can afford to take on a lot more risk. We could take bigger swings.
And then, when for as far as what we can control with the markets, well, we can't control what they're going to do while in any given time, we can control how we're going to choose to behave when markets work really well or when markets work against us. Right. And what I'm talking about is this thing called rebalancing. And so I think about the idea of, let's say we're 60% in the stock market and 40% in the bond market. So maybe we have an allocation to the US stock market of around, let's just call it 30% in that allocation. Well, I'm going to have what I call a tolerance band for you guys as clients on a portfolio. And so a 30% tolerance, 30%, 20% tolerance band is going to be a 6% swing either direction. So it's going to go down to 24 or up to 36. So basically think of it as like the exact percentage is hovering in between 36 and 24. And so long as it stays in between those numbers, we do nothing. But the moment it crosses over 36 to 37, we're going to sell 7% of the portfolio and bring it back to 30. Now think about what we just did there. We literally, so the stock market was going up. It was doing so well. It became a bigger slice of our portfolio than we wanted it to be. So we sold it, some of it, right? Brought it back to the normal allocation. We took those funds and went and bought whatever was doing poorly. You're like, why would I do that? You're literally selling high and buying low. That's what you're doing.
Yep.
And then think about the opposite way. So if it's the opposite way, we're at 30% bond stocks goes down to 23% stocks. Oh man, now we have to buy. So now we have to buy 7% to get back. So I probably need to sell some of those bonds that are probably performing okay right now. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they're doing okay. We're going to buy some stock. What are we doing? We're selling something that's doing okay, or maybe it's doing well, and we're buying something that's doing poorly right now. It's like, think of it. I always think of it as like when the stock market performs in a bear market, when it happens, it's like Amazon Prime Day happening or the Nordstrom half annual sale happening. It's like, that's an exciting time to go buy stocks. It doesn't feel like it at the time, but it is.
Yeah. And what's interesting is going back to having that plan, we just did two things there, right? Without even thinking of it. So we did it automatically, right? When we have those, I like to call them guardrails or thresholds, whatever you want to call them, right? If we set those ahead of time because we have the plan, what we've also done is we've removed the emotion from it, right? Because to your point, it never feels like it's on sale, right? As we're recording this today, a lot of stuff came out with NVIDIA and AI and those types of things, and it's probably bound to happen. And some of the biggest holdings were down double digits today. And I looked at some of those and said, oh, great, it's time to buy. All right. When we just create it systematically, again, it goes back to, do we have a plan, or what are the things that we have communicated, put in writing? We have our plan, and then we could systematize that. It makes it a lot easier. And we remove the emotion from that. Right. And the other thing, when we start to remove some of that emotion is, well, we start to check off goals along the way. Because what's really interesting is, like, when we start to zoom out, and we no longer have that short-term view, but we're zooming out, we have that longer-term view. What we've seen from rebalancing our account is we tend to do really well over time. And so a lot of times we're very short-term minded, but when we zoom out, we start to see the progress that we're making over time, and we remove those blinders to be able to look at. And I think you do it in your practice, Scott, too, of tracking more than just a number, but actually your progress, whether it's towards certain goals or it's achieving like milestones when it comes to your net worth. But again, it all ties back to things that are in our control, and it comes back to habits, right?
Huge fan of milestones for clients, and way more interested in looking at net worth growth than I am looking at the rate of return of a portfolio. Because the portfolio, we don't have much control over what the market does day over day, month over month, year over year. We don't. We have control over how we allocate to markets, which will help us see growth, and we have control over how much we save on our balance sheet, essentially, and how much we spend. Right. So looking at net worth is actually a really great way to look at how your total financial health is doing. Because if we look at it from that lens, we can look at how much do we have in liquid assets that are taxable. How much do we have in retirement assets? What do we have in real estate? If we own a business, how much is that worth? And all of those, once we understand what our annual spending is, you can basically translate to a number of years that they're worth to you. And to get back to the idea that we had before, we talk about withdrawal rate in the last episode, but if you flip withdrawal rate, you're basically saying, how many years of assets do I have in this asset? Right. And you and I both know that once you cross about 25 years of assets to 30 years of assets, you're financially free. Right. So it's a really interesting way to simply monitor your financial health.
I look at savings rate with, I'm buying my future retirement. Right. And so, when we look at dollar cost averaging or buying when things are on sale, I'm buying more shares, right? I'm less worried or concerned about the share price and more concerned on how many units can I swipe up in this next purchase to be able to help get me towards my number. So it all drives back to the plan, your personal savings rate, and being able to, like we said earlier, keep those blinders on and keep it personal, right? It's your plan. It's no one else's. You're in control of that.
And then if we think about it through the lens of, that's kind of a good general view. If we think about it through the lens of retirement, I think things that we can control there, I know things we commonly look at are going to be timing of Social Security. Of course, we're going to look at retirement age. And retirement age, I would add the caveat that kind of, you get to add to that, what does retirement mean to you? Like, how do you retire? And what I mean by that is, some people choose to just cut off from, right? They literally just sever off that part of their life and leave it behind. And then I know lots of other people who essentially consult, do other things. They want to keep their professional faculties at play. And that all translates to the way a plan works. It can actually make it so if that's what you want, and to do it for a number of years, you can actually, quote unquote, retire. You're in a sense semi-retiring a lot earlier than if you're just trying to cut everything off. What are your thoughts there?
And we did talk a little bit about it on the last episode, where retirement plans, right? They don't fail. They just adapt. They adjust, right? There's this idea that our financial plan that we've talked about throughout this episode, it's living, it's breathing, it's a verb, right? It's in motion, right? Nothing in life, whether it's markets or inflation or how much none of it's static, right? Things change, right? And so when we go to retirement, there's so many things that are within our control. And that's where the fun begins, I think personally, where, well, let's run some models. What happens if one spouse claims Social Security at one age and one delays till age 70? Or what if you both claim it at 67? Or, you know what, you've been talking about, I'm a big baseball fan, so I want to be one of the guys that counts tickets one day. I want to be what is that? Like an usher. And so that's income though, right? They have the cool jackets, right? They get to watch 81 games a year. Like, I'd love to get paid to do that. But what I'm also doing as well is that money I'm getting paid, I'm not drawing from my portfolio. So I just stretched out my retirement there. Right. So, and that goes into so many other things, whether we could talk about taxes or how we structure our portfolio, but there's so many things that are actually within our control, but it comes back to having that plan. What is it that we want? And then are we adhering to it? And how do we adjust or adapt as things change? So yeah, Social Security is a big one. Pensions versus lump sums, those types of things. There's a lot of things there that are inside our control.
Totally. And I think what I would, so much of all these little things that we're talking about that we can control today are tactics and strategies. And they're all derived from having a really great understanding of what does an amazing life look like to you. Because once you understand what that is, how you want to spend not just your money, but your time, your energy, and your talent, you get a much better sense of what the right money solutions are for you.
I think you touched on that really well. It's like the money solutions that are right for you, not anybody else, right? Because then you start making decisions that are different than what other people are going to do, because what happens in the market doesn't necessarily need to impact you depending or to the same degree, right? Or, what other people are spending money on, or when other people are taking Social Security, right? As it comes back to what's most important for you. And we have that destination, we have that goal, right? And
and when you have a really great sense of what matters to you, the kind of the shoulds and the ought tos of what other people think can kind of fade away, which is really nice.
Yeah. I get that a lot. You hear that from your clients sometimes, I should be invested in this. This did really well last year, or, ooh, we should be buying that house, or should send our kids to that school or grandkids, or, shoulds happen a lot.
Yeah. Less shoulding, more clarity with your own plan.
Right. Yeah.
Anything else for today?
I think that covers it, right? Focusing on what you can control. I think what we've covered, there's a lot more. I was surprised as we were going through it, how many more things are in our control amongst a world, at times that can feel well outside of our control when we look at the stock market.
Absolutely.
Bigger picture.
Well, thanks, man. Thank you to you at home listening. If you guys have a question that you'd love to have answered, we would be happy to answer it for you. Please feel free to submit a question on the page, and we'll see you guys next time.